We begin Act 2, arguably the weakest act in the film. There's some good stuff here, it just doesn't follow through on all that was established in the first act as well as it could have. The second act of the film focuses on Tony being separated from all of his resources and being forced to rely solely on his intellect. Jarvis, having prepared a flight plan for Rose Hill, Tennessee, brought them here immediately due to a malfunction, and Tony has now found himself stranded and alone.
Maybe I'll just cozy back up for...
I actually think I need to sleep now, sir.
Jarvis. Jarvis? Don't leave me, buddy.
Tony calls Pepper and apologizes for putting her in harm's way. He then proceeds to stay under the radar to try to track down the Mandarin while he's here. And to the dismay of some in the audience, Tony meets a kid named Harley who semi-partners up with him for a bit. It's certainly not what you would expect in a film like this, but to my surprise, it actually has some pretty good results. Tony and the kid seem to have a great deal in common. They're both inventors, and they're both very smart. It's just that Tony has been at it longer while the kid is just starting out. Now, some have speculated that the only reason a kid is even in this movie is due to orders from Disney, that they wanted a kid character in here to appeal to families. And ordinarily, I would say something like, oh, you guys are just being paranoid, but I actually don't think this is an audacious claim. In fact, it might be very likely. What I find works about this is that the film is all too aware of this, and seems to proceed with Tony and the kid having almost an understanding of what their own novelty is supposed to be, and they seem to mock that novelty even as they're playing it out. It's all very tongue-in-cheek, and doesn't feel in the slightest like a kid being in the film is dumbing it down. In fact, having a child present takes nothing away from Tony's character at all. He proceeds exactly like his character would when paired up with someone like this. It's almost as if the filmmakers got a note from Disney saying they wanted a kid in this movie, and they said, "You want us to have a kid interact with Tony Stark? Okay."
So, who's home?
Well, my mom already left for the diner, and Dad went to 7-Eleven to get scratchers. I guess he won, because that was 6 years ago.
Which happens, Dad's leave. No need to be a pussy about it. Here's what I need.
Tony and Harley bond over their knack for inventing, even exchanging some ideas on how to make the suits better. Harley makes Tony aware that he has been declared dead, and Tony gives him a non-lethal flare thingy to help him out with bullies, in exchange for a few random items that he needs. Meanwhile, Pepper receives Tony's message and then takes off with Maya Hansen, who tells her that her boss is working for the Mandarin, her boss just happening to be Aldrich Killian himself. And that's pretty much all that happens between these two. I said in the intro that there was a character or two that could have been removed from the film and we wouldn't really have lost anything. Yeah, there is a hint for where I'm going with that. Speaking of the Mandarin, he's about to arrive at what is apparently one of Killian's houses, or studios, or something. We see that he's a man of very few words in person, and when he does speak, this is all he says.
Well then, what are we waiting for?
Now, I'll admit that I did not guess exactly what the Mandarin twist was before it was revealed, but at this point, I did say to myself, there has to be something else going on here. It's just way too weird that every time we see the Mandarin, it's either through controlled video feeds or something ridiculously vague like this. Moreover, as I looked at him here, I realized that the Mandarin was just too perfect. It's hard to get a sense of exactly where he's from, as he doesn't really have any dialect at all, and the way he looks, you would think that someone grabbed bits and pieces of every Ayatollah and terrorist leader they could find and pasted them all onto the Mandarin's face. This seems designed to play on all of our current fears. I didn't spend too much time trying to figure out exactly what was going on, but here is when I knew that things had to be other than what they seemed. But what it ended up being, I did not see coming. Anyway, Tony and Harley arrive at the spot where one of the first bomb victims was found. This was the reason Tony wanted to come to Rose Hill in the first place. The bomb incinerated 6 people, including the bomber, but only 5 shadows appeared on the wall. As he and Harley try to figure this out, we get the second of 3 anxiety scenes.
You know what this crater reminds me of?
No idea. I don't care.
That giant wormhole in New York. Does it remind you?
That's manipulative. I don't want to talk about it.
Are they coming back? The aliens?
Maybe. Can you stop?
Are you going completely mental? I can stop. Do you want me to stop? Do you want me to
Remember
stop?
when I said to stop doing that? I'm swear to you're gonna freak me out. Oh, man, you did it, didn't you? You happy now?
What did I say?
Oh, shit.
So this one was not as good as the first scene we saw. It was far more comical and doesn't really lead to much of anything. Tony simply proceeds exactly as he would if this hadn't have happened. He doesn't retreat or seem to have any extra apprehension, so while the portrayal was still good, the scene itself wasn't as good. Tony asks about the bomber's mother, and Harley tells him that she is where she always is, at the bar. So Tony arrives to find her, strangely enough, waiting for someone else. She's here to give that someone a file on her son, and those someones turn out to be the bad guys. Obviously, Tony wants that file now, and so we have him once again relying only on his wits to beat all of the super baddies. And that's a pretty great thing to watch. Even more interesting than what Tony can do in the suits is what he can do out of them. Tony is the hero here, and we see that he can hold his own even when armed only with a microwave and a great deal of wit.
You walked right into this one. I've dated hotter chicks than you.
That's all you got? Cheap trick and a cheesy one-liner?
Sweetheart, that could be the name of my autobiography.
So, one villain down and one to go. And it turns out that it's Mr. Smug, who knocks a water tower down on Tony and snatches up the kid, holding him hostage in exchange for the file. Well, the flare thingy pays off, and Tony subdues him with an emergency pulse thing, which unfortunately was just a one-off. And it's here that Harley and Tony say their goodbyes, while once again slightly mocking their relationship that they're supposed to have.
So now you're just gonna leave me here, like my dad?
Yeah. Wait, you're guilt-tripping me, aren't you?
I'm cold.
I can tell. You know how I can tell? Because we're connected.
This ends the direct function that the kid will have in the film. The rest of it will be helping out behind the scenes. So here's my opinion on the issue of the kid. I can understand if some people didn't like this. I can understand why people might have had a few issues with it. I originally did myself. But honestly, the kid wasn't even in it for that long. In terms of real time in the film, he spent less than an hour with Tony. But their relationship, while not totally relevant to the story, does provide an interesting perspective on Tony, as it's almost like him interacting with a younger version of himself. And the way they seem to laugh about what their relationship is supposed to be, rather than getting truly sentimental about it, gives an interesting take on this kind of thing in general. So while on a technical level, I do think that the kid could have been written out and we wouldn't have lost much in the story, I also think that to lose him would have been to lose something good, at least on some level. So as for the plot, here's what I think just happened. The mother of the kid who was blown up had a file that the bad guys came for, and it turns out that the kid wasn't actually a bomber, but rather just a participant in an experiment. But Tony got there first, and it had data in it that led him to... Oh, wait, no, let me start over. The guy who was blown up had a file that the mother now has, and the bad guys are here now trying to retrieve it so that... yeah. If you've stuck with part 2 of this review so far, you've probably noticed what the problem is with Act 2. It was actually really difficult for me to comment on anything other than just saying what's happening at this point, because simply what's happening is most of what this is. The problem with Act 2, and I'm not saying this makes the movie bad, just a little loose, is that it's all very plot thick, and the story seems to have taken a back seat for a little while. Having Tony rely on his intellect without the aid of his riches or his tech is a great idea. It just felt like we did more seeing it than actually experiencing it, if that makes any sense. And it doesn't get much better from here. Pepper gets kidnapped by Killian, Maya is revealed to have been working with the villain all along, the Mandarin makes another threat and speech after killing one of the president's men, the Iron Patriot suit gets captured by the guys. It's mostly about things happening that set up other things, but it doesn't really move the story along very much. Again, it doesn't make the movie bad, it's just that the balance between plot and story, which was so good in the first act, is just a bit uneven in this one. Anyway, after tracking down some information in his file, in another scene that I think could have been cut, Tony finally zeroes in on the Mandarin, who oddly enough seems to be in Florida. He's ready to go after him, but unfortunately the armor is not. It's still in the process of charging, and according to Jarvis, might not charge at all. This sends Tony into another anxiety episode.
Tony? Are you having another attack? I didn't even mention New York.
Right, and then you just said it by name while denying having said it.
You're a mechanic, right?
Right.
You said so.
Yes, I did.
Why don't you just build something?
Okay.
Thanks, kid.
This portrayal of anxiety was the best in the film. The problem is that this is the last time it will ever come up in the film. There's no real resolution to Tony's anxiety, it just kinda stops happening after this, which makes the issue of PTSD feel remarkably unresolved. And I really don't understand what point they're trying to make by having the kid tell Tony to build something. Building something to try and get his mind off of his anxiety is what he had been doing in the first place. It's the reason he built so many suits. To really resolve this issue well, there should have been something else that got Tony to let go of his anxiety, something other than just leaning on his obsession in the first place. I mean, I thought that's what the whole point was, to get Tony to realize that it's okay to be okay, and that he doesn't have to build obsessively in order to feel secure. Having the resolution hinge on the kid telling him to build something seems to fly in the face of that. So while the anxiety part of the story was remarkably well done and still has value, I really can't say much for the resolution. It just wasn't very good. But still, Tony builds something and goes after the Mandarin. And as good as the previous scene of Tony acting without the suit was, this one puts it to shame. It's awesome to see Tony utilizing the bare bones resources he has and making it all work. You could give this guy a $50 budget and send him to Walgreens, and he'll still find a way to kick your ass. I just love this. This is the quintessential Tony Stark. So finally, Tony arrives in the Mandarin's room, and of course, what do you think is gonna happen? The Mandarin is gonna come out and make a speech, he and Tony will karate fight, blah blah blah.
I wouldn't go in there for 20 minutes.
What do you decoy your double, right?
Well, I mean, not understudy, no, absolutely not. Don't hurt the face, I'm an actor. Look around you, costumes, green screen. Honestly, I wasn't on location for half of this stuff. When I was, it was movie magic love.
Oh, holy crap! I did not see that coming! It turns out that the Mandarin sucking as a villain doesn't even matter because he was just a figurehead. The Mandarin doesn't exist at all. He's a homemade terror threat that Killian created and controls from behind the scenes. That's a great idea, and something that I did not expect. Rather than just trying to create the epic bad guy that so many other films have tried, and I'm sorry, failed at, this film tries to do something different than we naturally expect. That was so refreshing. And everything about this plays right into what this movie had been about in the first place. This whole film had the theme of things not being what they appear, from Killian transforming into a different person in the opening, to Tony not actually being in the suit. And the Mandarin being a concoction of someone else's imagination plays right into the idea of how the powers that be have handled that threat in the first place. Look at the rebranding of War Machine to Iron Patriot. It's the same suit, same abilities, same guy doing the same things. Does a new coat of paint and a new made-up name really change anything about this? No, it's all about how things appear on the surface. All about what the Iron Patriot symbolizes under controlled conditions, just like the Mandarin. In fact, over and over again, Brody has emphasized the importance of how things appear.
It tested well with focus groups, all right? They need to look strong. Come on, man, this isn't a good look. Open up.
They were playing the same game that Killian was playing with the Mandarin. They just didn't expect that he was doing the same thing. That is a very interesting statement on things like this. Make no mistake, the sale and overall marketing of a war is just as big and expensive a show as anything that an actor does. For so long, we have had film after film trying to make the big badass villain who steals the show, and it has been remarkably lame most of the time. Finally, someone dares to do something different for the sake of a good story.
Should have pressed the panic button.
Well, I panicked, but then I handled it.